You know, I've been trying very hard to keep these things daily, and I know several of you out there are going to be like, well, don't push yourself. But I want to keep doing these things daily. I want to try for that for many different reasons. But every now and again, I just screw up and then I screw up. This is actually take 4 for me, believe it or not. Let's see if I can actually manage this properly. Last time I was 30 minutes in before I realized my mistake. So forgive me if I sound like I'm repeating myself, because I am. This is the episode Initiations. It's kind of hard to summarize this episode because basically it's about filler, and Chakotay and Nog 2. I call him Nog 2. He's played by Aaron Eisenberg, who played Nog over on Deep Space Nine. I don't remember his name. I don't think I ever bothered listening for his name, and I don't care what his name is. He's Nog 2 forevermore. The end. Moving on. Now, a couple things I want to mention here right at the beginning. First of all, an episode like this is bothersome to look at. And this is going to be a problem with most of Season 2, really. The bad episodes are easier to talk about, as strange as it sounds, because they're bad. It's like, oh, God, that's so glaringly obvious. It's like, what's wrong with you? The good episodes are also easy to talk about, because I can talk about why they're good, what they did right, what went correctly within the formula. And then we have the dull episodes, which are, as I've already mentioned, as I will mention in the future here, at least 50% of this episode is pure, unadulterated, unnecessary, pointless, meaningless, stupid filler. Could cut it out and the episode wouldn't change at all. Nothing we would know about the characters or the plot or the development of the story or the people or anything would change at all. This is not unique to this episode, but this is the first one where it really gets bad like that. So Chakotay goes out on a shuttle, and because Kenneth Biller's a hack writer. Now, let me explain that, if I may, rather than just laying down a statement. One of the worst kinds of hack writing, in my opinion, is it happened because the plot needed it to. Now, in fairness, I understand this concept quite well, speaking as a writer, and it's something that happens to all of us. We have a good idea for a story. It's over here. We have to get to this point. You can't just, 90% of the time, you can't just start over here. You have to explain it, or you have to at least have the past in your mind. So even if the episode starts over here, you have to explain how it got to this point. You follow me? So in other words, no matter how you're doing this point B over here needs a point A to get to it. Hack writing is making up a point A that makes no sense, that has no reason or logic behind it, that literally happened because the plot required it. This is not unique to Star Trek Voyager, this is not unique to Star Trek, this isn't even unique to television. This is a very common problem in writing in general. It's just that Voyager tends to do this fairly often. Now, in case you're wondering how severely I mean this, let me outline this for you. He needs some privacy to have this ritual in order to honor his father. Okay, I'm with that so far. Towards the end of this episode, and actually the last scene of this episode, he is in his quarters on Voyager doing this ritual to honor his father. Now, for those of you who aren't fully getting the point, because the plot no longer required him to be out in a shuttlecraft all on his own, he could do it back on the ship. In other words, there was no actual, real reason behind it. Just an excuse. You follow me? Now, to be fair, I do understand this because when I was doing my rewrite of this episode for my Arshia and Gaia edition, I found myself in the exact same situation. I needed to get Nog 2 and Chakotay alone and basically segregate from both the rest of the Kazon and from Voyager. And getting to that point B required really thinking about it. In fact, I had to rewrite significant chunks of what I had done with my story in order to make that fit. But then, that's kind of my point, is when you have something like that, that's what you're supposed to do. You think about it for a while. You step back and you say, okay, how do I get to point B? And try and make something that makes sense rather than, bazong abracaplatus. Moving on. The Kazon are retarded. Now, I'm going to be using this term, the Kazon, often in two contexts. One is within the actual context of the series, the Kazon race. The other is the Kazon. I'll mention this more later. That's my version, okay? That's not what I'm talking about. For simplicity, we'll call them the Kazon race whenever I'm trying to try and make this clear. The Kazon race are retarded. I'm sorry, I have nothing good to say about them. I really don't. Zero good things to say about them. Now let's talk about why, okay? Because it's never enough for me. You know me. I don't like to just say it's terrible and move on. No. Let's talk about this. First of all, this episode and two other episodes really are what we know about the Kazon pretty much ever. The Kazon were actually completely dropped by the end of at the end of well, at the beginning of season 3. So this is it. This is their big time in the spotlight. Now, it was one of the original intentions that the Kazon would be the big villains of the Voyager crew, along with the Vidians and the guys whose name escaped me in the episode Prime Factors, I believe it was, with the Pleasure Planet and all that. Now, yes, really, by the way, for those of you who don't know, those people were actually supposed to be one of the 3 recurring villains of Voyager's show. I'm not sure how that would work exactly. So, oh goodness. Sorry, my back's really giving me issues today. The Kazon... Okay, let's talk about something that fiction in general has a problem with. And let's also try to be fair, as I do try to do. When you're making a new race, scratch that, when you're making a new culture in general, one of the things you have to do is either A, summarize it, which effectively means make a caricature of it, or B, spend an absolutely hideous amount of time fleshing it out in as much detail as you can, and still run the risk of being called a copycat or a hack because you're copying things that you know, aka, standard human society. Now, obviously, 90% of the time you go for the A version, to go ahead and just make the caricaturized thing. Star Trek itself is actually very bad about this. To be fair, Star Trek also has fleshed out several species to a significant enough degree that they have gone beyond caricaturization, and have actually become characterization. But for the most part, especially when it comes to like Aliens of the Week, for example, they just kind of throw together something and go with it. And I actually don't blame them per se for that. One of the other things that's very tempting to do when you're doing that when you're doing the A thing, is to base it off of some actual human society, because there's hundreds of them for you to pick from all forms of history, and they do vary quite significantly, right? Now, here's the problem. The Kazon are not an aping of any given human history. They are an aping of Star Trek history. They are the Kmart brand Klingons in every way. They are worse in every way, more generic in every way, less developed in every way, and never have an interesting character amongst them, as opposed to the Klingons, who, as much as they did have a bit of a characterization going on there, in addition to characterization, forgive me if I'm pronouncing it improperly, nevertheless, they did have interesting characters amongst the Klingons. I could name several dozen right off the top of my head. I'm not going to bother, but the point remaining. There is never, ever a single interesting Kazon. And the Kazon themselves are never, ever interesting. They are a Xerox copy of the Klingons. And it's done so poorly. Everything we learn about them, you must earn your name, and everything is dark, and we must protect our territory. Territory is power, and we never let go of a grudge, and we never bathe. I'm just inferring that from the hair. Yes, I know I'm not someone to talk, but No, you know what? I am. My hair is way better than the Kazon's. I'm sorry. I'm struggling to come up with another characterization of the Kazon. I really am. And that kind of makes my point for me. All we learn about the Kazon is that they are the space Vikings. The really dumb space Vikings. In fact, I would call them the space yokels. Actually, would probably be a better way to put that. Or the space hobos. I like that better. I'm going to start calling them the space hobos. So the space hobos, we learn about them, some of their background, how you have to earn your name, and how you have to, to protect your territory, and the other 2 facts I remember about their entire species. And that's it. And that's all. That's not a species. That's not even a neighborhood, Neighborhoods have more fleshed out development as far as personality than that entire species does. And that is my problem with the Kazon in a nutshell. The second problem with the Kazon in a nutshell is they are completely ineffectual. Every time they actually cause any problems for the crew at all, it's under one of 2 circumstances. 1, Seska, or 2, the crew are morons, and artificially morons at that, in ways that has been demonstrated that they aren't stupid already. Already they've shown this, and they will continue to show us in the future, but no. For this one scene, they happen to be holding the idiot ball, and they're just clinging to it with all their life. Yes, I'm so stupid! Oh, the Kazon got me! Well, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead in my notes here a little bit. Later on in the episode, there's a scene where Tuvok is like, we should go this way. Actually, let me get it right. One of the Kazon says this way is the safest travel, and Kazon and Tuvok says I should go this way because my tricorder says so. Now Tuvok is of course utterly, completely, blatantly wrong, and the Kazon get a chance to be like, you suck. And again, this scene is completely 100% filler. Because they have to then technobabble their way out, of course, because that's the only way out of anything in Voyager. But worse than that, Tuvok, someone who is extremely security-minded, and it's been demonstrated already, someone who knows how to actually think for himself outside of a damn tricorder, in addition to that, probably knows how to use a tricorder properly enough to detect signs of things that might, I don't know, indicate a problem, like a power source for the kind of force field that is being generated, both large enough and powerful enough, like the one that they have there. Just three things right off the top of my head there. And so Tuvok just randomly grabs the idiot ball and is like, no, let him do it. I don't even remember if I finished my point with the Kazon because they're so pointless. No pun intended. They are a wasted space. Yeah. There is one thing I really want to mention about this. I'll talk about two good things. I've been basically bashing this episode. There are a couple good things about this episode. I'll admit that. This is not a bad episode. It's a boring episode. One of the real biggest problems I have with this episode is the filler part. Let's go ahead and discuss this, shall we? During this episode, the crew kind of follows together behind Chakotay. Okay, let me make this clear. We know what's happening with Chakotay because we're watching it as it happens. And then we watch the crew of the Voyager come behind and try and pick up the breadcrumbs and figure it out as they go. This type of storytelling can be done well. It is hard to do. You have to either do a specific type of storytelling in the former, which then relates to the latter, or you have to do both in a completely different manner so that the audience is basically getting different information from both perspectives. Instead, what we get is like a parrot happens to be in the room, and I'm like, I'm reading this thing here, like this. Okay, here. Space yokels equals bad. That is actually one of my notes, okay? And then immediately after that, it's scene cut, and we're on the Voyager, and there's a parrot that goes, space yokels equals bad. That's it. That's all it is. It is so filler. It is so 100% filler. It's pointless. We don't learn anything about the crew. We don't learn anything about the episode. We don't learn anything about Chakotay. We don't learn anything about Naga 2. We don't learn anything about the Kazon. There's no attempt to actually build drama or pathos or interest or relevance or anything. I know I mentioned this right at the beginning, and I apologize for my repetition. Again, this is take 4 for me, so forgive me. But you just chop half of this episode out, and it changes nothing. It makes it shorter. That's it. And that's one of the things I dislike about hack writing as well, by the way, is just writing out things to fill out 40 minutes of television, or 45, or however long it actually is. One other thing I have to mention here is Neelix. Two things about Neelix. One bad, one good. Well, one sort of bad. The problem is, and I've said this so many times, I swear I'm going to turn this into a drinking game. Anytime I say this Neelix scene, I could see where it started, and it started in a good place, and then they took it to an extreme in order to make some dumb comedy out of it. Every time I say that, take a drink, because it just keeps happening. And towards the beginning of this episode, we see Neelix is concerned that they're not utilizing him properly, that he knows more about this space than they do. He wants to actually help with the crew, While he is glad that he's contributing, he wants to do more. Everything I just said is completely reasonable, completely logical, makes perfect sense. Is even Neelix being a little bit more Neelix rather than, I'm a bad cook and I have jealousy problems. So, all of that is fine, right? Now, if you've actually seen the episode, you know that scene is terrible because they take it and what they do is they crank it to 11 to make the comedy come out. For example, Janeway, instead of just saying, you have already genuinely helped the crew, has to point out the fact that Neelix is a terrible cook. Because that's funny, apparently, Neelix being a terrible cook. And I just have to say this because they just keep cramming it down our throats that Neelix is a bad cook, and that's funny. You should laugh at it. The second thing is everything he does is so exaggerated to the point of stupidity. It's like I'm watching The Riddler. Jim Carrey's The Riddler, hopping around the scenery going, I want to be useful. It saps anything out of it. You can see the framework here there. You can see where the scene started. And I swear to God, there's one writer at Voyager who has just made it his or her mission to destroy Neelix in every scene possible. Just every time they see him, it's like, oh, wait, we have to mention that he's a bad cook. You understand? Because he's a bad cook. And that's funny. Now, in fairness to this episode, I liked the next Neelix scene, which is the one where he's posing as the captain, basically, and dealing with the other Kazon ship. I like this for two reasons. One, Neelix is actually being competent. Oh my god, I know. But no, seriously, he is actually being competent. He deals with them properly, he deals with them on the level, he deals with them, as much as I hate to say this because I just finished ranting about how stupid the Kazon are, like a Kazon should be dealt with. He approaches them with force, he approaches them with threats, he approaches them, basically being completely unwilling to negotiate or back down. And from everything we've seen so far, that is how you should approach a Kazon. And he does this also by pointing out the logic of the situation. After he's successfully established his alpha dog dominance, he then says, "Oh, you don't." And the other guy immediately replies with, a "I will hurt myself, but I'll hurt you" too threat. Which Neelix then responds, like, "Neither you nor I want that. Why don't we just go ahead and get our people out of here and move on, right?" Everything about that was perfect. That was exactly spot on. It was actually really well done. And the second reason I like it was in no point in time did Neelix kind of go, "Ha ha, I'm Neelix." No, he was actually being Neelix, the character. It's so rare when Neelix actually, when Ethan Phillips can actually act like Neelix instead of this cartoony ball of stupid, that every time it happens, I can't help but notice it because it's so odd, and I like it. I like it when Neelix is actually Neelix. And I'm sorry, I sound like I'm ranting again, but this is a good thing. I liked that scene. It's a shame because I'm going to be completely ejecting into my changes section, but moving on. One other thing that I will probably be ejecting in my changes section is... This is, again, both a good and a bad thing. I want to put it in the net good. Chakotay... The scene between Chakotay and Nog 2, where they talk about given names versus earned names, and the idea of the uniform versus the name... Again, this is another scene that on paper and in the framework of it is good. The idea should have been the two of them kind of reaching a common ground and a level of understanding between each other. What it came out as, especially given the way Beltran was directed to act, and I have to say it that way because it wasn't Beltran. I've read up on this one as well. I can't even remember the director's name, was basically, stand up upon high on the parapets and yell down to the masses and teach them, because instead of this, it's like Chakotay's up here preaching at Nog 2 down here. What that should have been is what it originally felt like. If you listen to the lines bereft of the way they're being presented, most of it is still there. The core, the gem of it is still there. The idea is that first of all, the concept of given name versus earned name is something that's happened here in our apps, on Earth in real life. That's not exactly an uncommon thing in our history. But the idea of earning your right to be whoever you are in your society, really earning something like that, is incredibly common to the point of the norm, if you know what I mean. And the fact that he draws the comparison between his uniform and Nog 2's name was actually a good thing, and indeed was the perfect selling ground. While Nog 2 has to earn his name through different manners, he still has to work for it, he still has to earn it, he still has to strive for it and keep going for it. Same exact thing for that uniform. And I thought that was an excellent way for the two to try and have some kind of scene together. It is such a shame that this is such a hack script with a bad director, because I like Eisenberg as an actor. He's the guy who plays Nog. And I like Beltran whenever he's actually allowed to act. And this could have been a great scene between the two of them. If you'll forgive me for diverging for a second, I forget the episode. In DS9, there's a scene where Nog is talking to Cisco. And Avery Brooks, also an excellent actor, and Aaron Eisenberg just sell that scene, just left and right, just boom, blow it right out of the water, as Nog literally breaks down in tears and just lays it all out for him. And Cisco started that scene not being willing to push him through Starfleet, and ended it being his advocate, being the person behind him saying, "Yes, you are going to Starfleet. I support you fully." That was an amazing and powerful scene, and I feel like that's what this should have been, if you know what I mean. That's what we were deprived of. Let's talk about my changes. Now, the Kazon, in my setting, to remind any of you out there who've forgotten, is the same here in the real life as saying the Army, okay? The Navy. It's not just one particular sect of the military, it is the entire military arm of the Conclave, okay? Now, this is the first point, and I'm going to make it right off the bat here. They haven't encountered the Kazon yet because the Conclave isn't really aware of them yet. In fact, as I'll discuss in a moment here, they basically stumble upon the Kazon in this case. And there's also going to be a bit of surprise because they encounter the Kazon way back in Caretaker. I mention this because this is something that's supposed to kind of sit in the viewer's head. The idea that they encountered the Kazon all the way back at the beginning of Season 1, And all of a sudden they encounter them again here, even though they've gone a great deal of distance, even though they're far away from the array and all the events thereof, the Kazon are still here. And the whole point of that is not only to give an idea of the kind of stretch and reach and uh, dimensions that these people patrol, but for other reasons, which I don't want to spoil just yet. Now, let's go ahead and talk about my format for the episode, because that's the least important thing in my changes, if you'll forgive me. The general idea here is that every now and again the Voyager is currently going through Terranok space. They are going through the lands of the Terranok Alliance right now, alright? Now, they have to be careful while they're going through it, and they have to be cautious. And so one of the things they do is they send out shuttles, which are a lot easier to mask from long-range sensors than a whole ship. And these every now and again they stop, and these shuttles will go out and gather resources and scout out the nearby area and try and figure out the best path forward. Now, during one of these periods at which, and this will be mentioned later because I like the idea of the episode starting with Chakotay in the shuttlecraft, but it'll be mentioned like in a first officer's log entry. I have volunteered for this particular mission because this happens to be the day of my father's death, and I wish to honor him with the ritual of blah. It doesn't matter. I'm fine with keeping that. So he goes to do that, and he's investigating a moon, and as he's investigating it, he suddenly finds himself being hit by like a gravitational pull that I wasn't expecting, that shouldn't be there for such a small mass. And then some of his systems start to short out, and he starts having issues, and the shuttlecraft crashes. Okay, yes, I know it sounds rather cliche. Just bear with me. Like I said, I kind of had to rewrite all this to make it make sense. Hopefully, it makes sense. Hopefully, it's still enjoyable. I'm uncertain as to how to end the teaser, either just with the shuttlecraft crashing, or with something I like a little bit better, which is the shuttle crashes and Chakotay is struggling, trying to get the emergency supplies, getting out of the thing, and the camera pans back a ways from the shuttlecraft until it reaches a part some ways away where we see someone is watching him. Cue to credits, right? Or not credits, but opening title crawl. Now we find what happens here is that's Nog 2, okay? The same character. I would still have it be Aaron Eisenberg. He would still be playing a young child individual, not of the Kazon race. In fact, his race is so irrelevant I have decided not to bother making up one, because it doesn't matter. It's a specific thing that only matters because it has to be something, if you follow me. But he is of this race, his captain is of another race, and his first officer is of a third race. That is relevant for later on purposes, and for flavor, but not relevant enough to actually come up with race names, okay? Just kind of skipping ahead a little bit here. Now, the way this episode would go is, I don't want to spoil it all in advance. I originally was going to. I like the idea of trying to display it as the episode does better. He gets out of the ship, and there's Kazon Nog 2, and Nog 2 basically says, this is one of the weakest invasion forces I've ever seen? And Chakotay's like, I'm not here to invade anything. My shuttle crashed. And he's like, what? Do you not know how to pilot your own shuttle? Now, one of the things I would want to get across, and I know Aaron Eisenberg can do this, he's a good enough actor for this, is to try and get that air that he is blustering. He is clearly and obviously trying to puff himself up and be like, well, I suppose if you're completely amenable, I could just kill you unless you can, shoot, I forget the exact phrasing. I had a specific phrase I wanted him to say, which basically was him being passive-aggressive and basically intimating that he might kill Chakotay, even though he has no intention of doing so, because what he wants is Chakotay to defend his position by saying, well, I'm skilled at ground operations as well. I can survive on rough terrain. Maybe I can be of use to it. Maybe we can find some mutual cooperation thing. And then Nog 2 would, no, I'll consider it for now. If you want, you can come, but you'll have to keep up because I'm in a bit of a hurry. And then he would just kind of leave, and Chakotay would be like, okay. Now, as they're going, Nog 2 doesn't say much of anything in general. He does kind of ask after a bit, who this person is. For those of you out there who have not remembered, the Kazon as a whole, and indeed the Conclave as a whole, have not heard of Voyager yet. That's going to be a much more important point later on. Not later on as in this episode, later on as in the series. But, so he's, who are you? Where are you from? Well, I am Chakotay, Starfleet Voyager. I've never heard of them. Oh, we come from the Alpha Quadrant. That's quite a ways away. And just kind of a general commentary going between the two. Now, I have not gone and actually written out these scenes specific to specific. I have not figured out the actual traps they would go through or the obstacles they would overcome because, frankly, it's actually completely irrelevant to the actual point, which I will be covering. This episode has three main characters. In order, that would be Chakotay, the Kazon, the faction, the army, and Nog 2, okay? Now, During this first act, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead just a little bit because, again, I haven't thought out specifics. We learn a great deal about Chakotay's past, and in so doing, understand why he is the way he is now. We learned that he is from Earth. Now, one of the things I've mentioned before is I'm very much in favor of the Earth as a paradise idea for many reasons, most of which are literary. It makes sense to me. Earth is a paradise. The end. All right, moving on. I could do a whole video just about that topic. I'm not going to do that. So he was born and raised on Earth. He was very explorative in nature. He wanted to grow. He wanted to learn. He ended up joining Starfleet. He ended up going by the rules, going by the book. It never really failed him. He understood protocol. He was all good with it. He excelled at it. He turned out to be a natural leader, a good commander, and very charismatic. He ended up joining the officers track. He ended up getting his place to, I'd say, about a lieutenant, maybe lieutenant commander. Someone who very clearly, within a few years, will have escalated his way. Well, not in a few years, but you get the point. Before his career is done, he will be a captain of a starship. There's almost no question of it, right? Now, he hasn't seen a lot of action. He saw only very minimal action during the Cardassian conflict, okay, to give you an idea of timeline here. Now, sometime towards the end of that, he ended up learning about the plight of the colonists, okay? This is just before the Maquis were actually formed. Now, Chakotay, being the way he was, decided to try and, petition for help or talk to his superiors or move up through the ranks or whatever. He tried to get formal help for these colonists. He tried to he tried to summarize. He tried to move through the system. Okay, he tried to use the system that he knew, that he'd always known, and followed the rules and toed in the line and did what he was told, and it amounted to nothing. Starfleet basically refused to do anything, shut him down in all cases, almost threatened to reprimand him on one occasion when he wouldn't shut up about this concept, basically. And I would like a line that Chakotay gives Nog to, which is basically the thought of, I realized that, one man alone couldn't change the world, couldn't change the system, actually, is what I want. One man alone couldn't change the system. And so he ends up learning about these Maquis who have just been formed, basically, takes several members of the crew that he happens to be on and leaves. And they go and they end up defending a nearby colony from a raider attack from Cardassians. And in so doing, when he lands, he sees them and the people are like, "Oh my God, thank God, we thought Starfleet had abandoned us." And it's at that moment that it all fully hits for Chakotay. The true betrayal, the true extent of the betrayal of trust that Starfleet is actually encountering. And it's at that moment that he realizes that as much as he wanted to explore, as much as he wanted to do, too much of him, too much of who he really was the desire to help, to do good, for lack of a better way to put it, chaotic good. And he realizes in that moment that all his career, all his ambitions, all his explorations, laying it all aside for the sake of seeing the gratitude on these people's faces, was an exchange he'd make a dozen times over. That this was more worth it than anything else he'd done in his whole life. And I would have him talk about, how he stayed there for several months and ended up defending this one colony and ended up actually, officially joining the Maquis and becoming part of that resistance and stuff like that. Now, somewhere towards the end of this, we would find out that they are being monitored by by some of the Kazon leadership in the area. When I say leadership, I'm talking at the captain level, not anything significant. And so, during this period of time, Nog 2 essentially leads them down a slightly altered path, going through one of the things I haven't mentioned yet, I don't think, because this is Tyche 4, is that this moon is actually a training facility for the... He's not actually on a mission, per se. He is here to train to earn a pay raise, okay? For reasons I'll get into in a minute. We start to learn about the Kazon, the military arm of the Conclave, from Nog 2. Now, I'm just going to lay this all out flat, okay? Rather than do it from his perspective. Oh, goodness. The Kazon have some very basic rules about joining, okay? There's no conscription. In fact, you cannot choose to join the Kazon in lieu of prison time or anything like that for punishment. In fact, one of the biggest rules is you cannot join the Kazon if you have a criminal record on Conclave file. So, that by itself says a great deal, I would like to think. It really gets several of the points across about how the Kazon deal with themselves. But ironically, or I shouldn't say ironically, I'm not there yet. One of the other points is that they have a very good public image. The Conclave worlds in general have very restricted travel. Not extensively restrictive, not oppressively. But for example, here in real life, you need a passport and a visa and various amounts of money and time in order to go from country to country. For something so relatively simple, we have the tech, we have the technology. It would only take a day to get from where I am right now to basically half the planet if I had the money and the ability and the time and the resources to have already set that up in advance. You follow me? But that's exactly my point. It is a hassle, and so the only people who tend to do so are people who already have a pre-existing reason to. Most people stay still because they don't have a lot of reason to go through all that hassle, right? Even if they have a desire to, it's just not worth it to them. This is the same kind of general concept that's going on within the conclave space. And so one of the big draw points is the Kazon don't have boundaries for all intents and purposes. They roam freely, and a lot of people want that kind of life, want to be more nomadic, want to be more explorative. The same kind of things I was just talking about with Chakotay, actually, if you're paying attention here. Similarly, the pay is good. I'll just start with that. You are actually well paid to be a part of the Kazon. I'll mention one of the reasons for that later. But another point, finally, is the fact that how do I put this? You know what? I'm just going to stop there because those are the important parts. So we learned from Nog 2. This is how the Kazon work. I'm sorry. There's actually one other thing. There is actually no minimum age restriction. This is why Nog 2 joined when he was so young. All you have to do is pass basic training. If you can pass through the basic training, which is pretty severe, don't forget, and get onto a ship and serve either in the ground forces or within the naval branch, congrats, you have just joined the Kazon. Now he did this, and we start to learn more about the internal side. The external side is everything I've been talking about so far. They have a good public image, all things considered. They are actually rather well regarded. People actively are lining up to join the Kazon, and it is basically continuously growing. And the budget allowed to them is absolutely enormous. So the Kazon are basically experiencing continuous growth. You follow me? Well, that's actually not 100% true, because in fact the Kazon are actually quite stagnant in terms of numbers. You see, internally, in order to, you're assigned a pay grade based on how well you perform, and at any point in time you may petition to try and go through a series of tests, usually physical tests like on this moon, in order to receive a bump up to one grade if you do sufficiently well. This is what Nog 2 was doing in this case. Now, the options to do this are not common. Obviously, in this case, the only reason Nog 2 was given this option at all was his ship happened to be in the vicinity, and he had already been petitioning for this for some time, and the captain decided, since we're here, I'll go ahead and let you. Now, the captain on his particular ship is someone who is very tactically well-minded, a very good, competent commander, but doesn't really play well at internal politics. And we find out bit by bit that there is actually a huge amount of internal politics within the Kazon. Because you see, the Kazon, simply joining a member of the Kazon effectively means you're the equivalent of, say, a Janissary back in the 1500s, I guess that would be. To get more specific about what I mean here, you aren't actually a free man. You cannot own land, you cannot own property for the most part. You have what is given to you and what is allotted to you by the organization as a whole. You yourself are basically meaningless, with two exceptions. I'll get to that in a minute. But for all intents and purposes, you are only one step above a slave. You follow me? So while you are paid, and paid fairly well, all things considered, compared to most normal jobs, that's about it as far as draw from that goes. If you want to get anywhere, these pay grade things are only let's just say they're not a very reliable way of increasing your income within the Kazon. The more reliable way is to try and become an elite. Becoming an elite is the same basic concept as actually happens in the episode with regards to earning your name. You have to earn it in some manner. And the terms are very vague on that because one of the most common ways of earning it is by actually taking out someone directly superior to you who also is an elite. Now, there's kind of a catch here. You may think that I'm just encouraging the kind of situation that happened in the Mirror Universe, for example. I am not. The problem is there is a great deal of internal politics. Simply, for example, killing your captain is not going to make everyone go up in rank. More likely, it will get you killed for assassinating your captain. No, you have to have backing, you have to have support, you have to have people in place ready to be alibis. You have to basically successfully assassinate this guy and simultaneously make sure that nobody else knows you did it, but at the same time enough other people know that you did do it and did it well enough and they support you in doing it. If you follow where I'm going with this. In other words, there's a great deal of very non, believe it or not, non-violent politics going on. A careful balance. Obviously, violence is involved because there is internal killing going on, but it's not as frequent as I'm making it sound. It's actually very rare, okay? Now, we find out that the first officer of this particular ship is very, very politically minded. He is a very good leader. He is interested in keeping his crew happy. Oh, and that's another thing I forgot to mention. It is incumbent upon any given Kazon captain or leader of any given squad or battalion or whatever to make sure that their people are content, happy. One of the ways this tends to happen is they will engage in piracy in order to get, stuff, basically, food, goods, additional money, something to help placate the men, basically, is really where it's at. Now, there's a catch to this, as there always is with me. If you do something like that, ironically, you have to leave no survivors. Now, I mention ironically because I want to stress that while this is someone robbing someone, it is someone robbing someone with an almost air of cordialness, okay? They are not doing it because, I'm evil. They're doing it because I want to maintain my position, and therefore I'm going to have to rob you of everything you own and kill you in order to make sure that my men don't rebel against me and that this ship keeps functioning. Now, that is still evil. Let's make this clear. But it is a very different type of evil than the standard piracy of, there's stuff, let's go. And it is very well policed, if you know what I mean, because here's the catch. The reason they have to leave no survivors is because anytime they do, and this does happen from time to time, word gets out. And that ship that did it, that left survivors, is now labeled a pirate ship. And guess what the entire other Kazon Navy within the region is going to be going after? They have literally signed their own death warrants. And again, they can't leave any survivors, so that ship is gone. Because this PR aspect to the Kazon is very important to the Conclave. One or two random ships getting lost within a region every month or so, that's normal. Kazon pirates going about taking from Conclave citizens, that's not cool. You follow me? Now, in this particular case, this commander guy has only been keeping in charge because he has been engaging in this piracy. He's been doing it more than he should be, if you understand what I mean. And a lot of the crew really don't like that. Now, his first officer has been playing the political game. He's not nearly as good of a tactician. He's not nearly good as a commander. But he has been getting a lot of support from the crew. Now, the catch here is, you're probably asking, why hasn't he killed the captain? Is because the captain is extremely good tactically speaking. He is a good commander. And you don't just kill someone who is that much of an asset without having really good, serious reason for doing so. In fact, arguably, the general position the first officer finds himself in is that he can't, okay? I'm sorry for all this background. This is all stuff that would be expounded on in the episode itself. The next point, the final point, I've never actually gotten to this point, my gosh, I might actually finish this video this time, is Nog-2 himself. In the final act, as it gets down to it, Nog-2 starts to reveal that he doesn't like this kind of life, but it's better than the alternative. And at this point, Chakotay's like, what do you mean? And Nog-2 reveals that he is the only surviving member of his family, at whatever age he is. Let's go ahead and say 18, just off the top of my head. And his brothers and his father and mother all died basically of disease because they couldn't afford proper medical care, except for one of the brothers who actually starved to death because they didn't have enough food, and he was giving the rest of his food to him, to Nog-2. They lived in squalor, in the most literal sense of the word. They lived in absolute destitution, and he hated every moment of it. And his father had raised him to be a moral individual, and his father had always believed that, joining the military was not an acceptable point. And the way his father would put it to him was that, being paid, getting to fill your belly off of someone else's blood just doesn't sit well with me. But ultimately we find out that two things about this character, about Nog-2. He ended up joining the military because I'm sorry, I'm actually getting ahead of myself. He actually has a criminal record. He faked it and managed to successfully weasel his way in because he was so desperate and so afraid and didn't know what else to do. And he didn't want to die just like the rest of his family did. He didn't want to just fade away because of some stupid principles or something like that. But we also find out that he feels very guilty about that, especially because, as I just mentioned, this particular ship and the captain he serves under has been engaging in piracy more than not. So he has more or less literally been filling his belly with the blood of others. And he feels extremely guilty about the whole situation. And this is actually the point in time we would learn about the first officer and how he tends to think of things in a more measured manner and wants to actually, keep crew morale up in ways that don't involve murder. And it comes out, the more we learn about him, the more we learn that he is actually quite a moral individual and he hates what he is being forced to do. But ultimately, he found himself in the same situation Chakotay was in, which is one of the reasons I really mentioned that back in the first act of this episode. Before he joined the military, before he admitted he started becoming a criminal, before he reverted to crime, one of the things he did was try to move through the system, tried to get a normal job, tried to get a normal place to live, tried to get registered, tried to get, he tried to use the system in order to make things work, and it didn't. It didn't work. The system failed him, just like it failed Chakotay. And so, after a while, driven to desperation and fear, he ended up just stealing for what he wanted, got caught, and realized that he had a choice of basically forsaking his life entirely, or at least taking a chance and trying to join the Kazon. And he succeeded at joining the Kazon, and managed that, and there he is. But at the same time, he's not even sure it's any better. Yes, I am surviving, but I'm not sure I'm living. Now, I've mentioned that thread before, life in place of survival. One of the things I want throughout my whole series is for that thread to be there as just a barely noticeable background. Not one of the major arcs per se, just something that is a common theme. The difference between life and survival. And this is another example of it. He believes that while he is now surviving, his actions have purchased continued existence for him. They have not purchased life. And Chakotay wonders if there would be a better way, and they think about this, and ultimately the kid reveals that if he killed Chakotay as an invader, and was able to present it to him, he would be able to not only get his raise, he might actually qualify for elite status. Because as I've mentioned before, killing someone else who is an elite is not the only way to become an elite. By the way, the general term for elite, I don't think I defined this, is the equivalent of landed. Okay. Someone who has been given land, someone who has some automatic rights to ownership and property and stuff like that. So, moving on. And so after, a lot of soul searching, Chakotay realizes that once again, he's in the position where he could do something that is quote-unquote wrong in order to accomplish a good, something that he is willing to sacrifice of himself to give. So he basically offers the kid, after a lot of soul searching, he says, look, I would rather you live than you survive. So I'm willing to do this. And we get to the point where, he's going to kill Chakotay, the invader, and the first officer comes, and the captain comes, and the captain says, I knew you had it in you. This'll elite you for sure. And this comes the twist. Now, those of you who've seen the episode probably actually already caught the twist. It's just the whole format of it is a little bit different. You see, he ends up killing the captain. The captain was elite. The captain was landed. The first officer was not. Now, what ends up happening as a result of this is Nog 2 is now officially elite. The first officer will take his place as captain, having never soiled his hands with the affair, and there's basically no real witnesses to this other than Chakotay, who, of course, isn't going to say anything. And as a result of this, Nog 2's situation has been improved, the ship's general situation has been improved, and we now have a further understanding of all three of the characters involved, in counting the Kazon themselves as one of those characters. But there's another line that I want to mention here, because again, no need to involve the rest of the crew at all. Basically, the idea here would be, now that you're in charge, I would like to barter for his safe passage back to his crew. And the first officer says, no need for barter. I understand. And he's helped us greatly improve our situation. Without him, this wouldn't have been possible. Because it's only because Chakotay was there that he was able to get this whole situation involved, basically is what I'm getting at. And as they're going back to Voyager, there would be a coda where Chakotay is talking with Nog 2, and Nog 2 says, do you think it'll ever get better? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Chakotay says, do you think it'll ever get better, this system of yours? Because you're still in the system. You're still doing the things just like I was, and nothing's changed, nothing's better. And Nog 2 says, basically repeats his quote back at him, one man cannot change history by himself. I didn't even say that, did I? I'm sorry. Earlier on, Chakotay had a quote where he says, one man alone cannot change things, cannot change history. And so, God, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm really tired, and I've been doing this too many times. So this is the point at which Nog 2 returns that quote to him and says, "One man alone cannot change things." And Chakotay looks at him and says, "Well, I hope you discover what I discovered after that too." And Nog 2 says, "What's that?" And Chakotay says, "That I am not just one man alone. That I have friends, family, co-workers, comrades in arms, and that together we might actually be able to do something about that." And that's basically how the episode ends. And the general idea here is to get across the point that the Kazon, while theoretically the enemy of the crew, really aren't, especially on an individual level. One of the things I also would want to make clear is that the first officer would agree to make absolutely no mention in official record of Chakotay or his crew. They're going to keep the ship secret. They're going to keep their secret for them. And again, that will become more important later on. Um, but ultimately, all that political backdrop and all the exposition about the Kazon, as much as I want to get it in, and I think this is a great episode to get it in, is ultimately backdrop for the stories of Chakotay and Nog 2 here. These two individuals who I just kind of want to flesh out more. I've said before that a guest star does not necessarily have to be a character that we see and forget. That there can be engaging, interesting guest stars, and it's been true in Star Trek before, and that's kind of what I want to go with this. Anyways, I think I've actually succeeded. Oh my god! So I'm going to take a break now because I'm going out of my mind, and I will talk to you guys soon.